Welcome to my channel and this series called The 411 on 911. I'm your host Christy, and in today's episode we are going to be talking about some real 911 calls that I ran as a paramedic that had an unexpected and lasting impact on me. None of these calls are particularly unusual for EMS, but each one had a little trigger for me that caused it to impact me just a little bit more, and that is the reason that I chose these stories to tell you today. For those of you that are new here, let me take a second to give a little bit of background. My name is Christy. I was a paramedic for over 10 years. I started this YouTube channel 1 year ago after I had a motorcycle wreck 2 years ago where I was internally decapitated and started documenting everything that I went through and my recovery up until this point. Now I create content here on YouTube, and now you're caught up. If you're one of my regular subscribers, I just want to say thank you for coming back and joining me today, and also the biggest shout out to all of my channel members, especially my VIPs. I appreciate you guys so much, and you guys are the best. Now that that's out of the way, before we get started, let me just reiterate that my mental health is in a good space, and me talking about these things does not mean that anything is wrong or that I'm struggling in any way. Please take a moment and read this disclaimer before we get started. By telling these stories, I hope to humanize first responders and to bridge the gap between us and the general public. We were dispatched to a residence this day, and I don't really even remember what we got dispatched for. It may have come out as unconscious, or it could have even come out as a cardiac arrest. I'm not sure. I honestly don't even remember who my partner was that day, but we got there to find the gentleman outside in the yard laying on his back, and he was deceased. There's nothing unusual about that call. There was no signs of any kind of foul play or anything like that. So you may be wondering, well, what is the point of this story? What was so impactful for me on this particular call was a storm had blown through that day, and I did my thing. I put the patient on our cardiac monitor and confirmed asystole. For non-medical people, asystole just means a flat line. There's no cardiac activity whatsoever. So I called the doctor, and a time of death was given, and then we usually would cover the patient up and wait on the coroner or whatever. But what was unique about this call to me was so unexpected, but it just gave me the biggest gut punch. And all these years later, I still think about it all the time. It's like an image that's burned in my brain. He was wearing glasses, and a storm came through. So he was out in the weather for a little bit, not long, but long enough that he was soaking wet, and I guess it was just kind of the water droplets on the glasses were so out of place and something that you never see, and it's really hard to explain why that bothered me as much as it did, but all I could think was, those aren't supposed to be there. The glasses aren't supposed to be wet. It was the weirdest. For me to fixate on that doesn't make a lot of sense, but for whatever reason I did. And the water droplets on the glasses were just very out of place and something that you don't see a lot. And it just, in my brain, it was like, his glasses aren't supposed to be wet, and for whatever reason I sort of fixated on that. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, but to this day I think about the wet glasses, and I'm curious to know if that's something that other first responders do. I talked to my husband about this, who's also a paramedic, actually last night, and I would not have given it the word trigger, but we were kind of talking about, because I was asking him if some of these things bother him too, and he said, it's just purely circumstantial from call to call. You don't ever know what's gonna jump out at you, and for whatever reason, that was a trigger for me. And the wet glasses is, I guess, a symbol of just EMS, police, fire, all first responders just seeing so many things that you shouldn't see. The glasses shouldn't be wet, and we shouldn't have to see some of the things we saw. That may not make any sense, or it may make total sense, but for whatever reason, the wet glasses has just always stuck with me. I'm intentionally going to be very vague talking about this next call. My partner and I were dispatched to a scene involving a horrific accident with a child. I will not go into the details of what exactly happened, but the child was obviously deceased. Any call like that involving a child is just horrific at baseline, but then you add on top of that having to be the one to tell mom and dad and everybody else that there's nothing that you can do is a horror that they don't prepare you for in school. On this call, for whatever reason, I found myself in the back of the ambulance with the child, and the mother was begging to see the child. So I found myself cleaning up the child as best I could so that the mother could see the child. And it took me a little bit, but I did the best I could. I guess that was my way of trying to do something to try to control something. In any case, all around horrific call. Any call involving a child is a paramedic's worst nightmare. But what got me, a few weeks later, I ran another call, and it was someone had died, and we took the body to the funeral home. When we got finished moving that patient into the embalming room, and I was getting everything together to leave, I saw on the counter a pair of child's shoes, and I knew immediately who the shoes belonged to because I stared at those shoes for a while that day when I ran the call, and it was definitely an unexpected gut punch. It literally took the wind out of me, and children's shoes always reminds me of that call now. But all around, pretty horrible day, mostly for that family, of course, and I think about them all the time. This is another call that something out of place seemed to bother me more so than other things. And again, I don't know if I'm speaking a weird language here or if all first responders kind of fixate on these out of place things like I did, but I ran a car wreck one time, and the patient was not wearing a seatbelt, wrecked in a cow pasture. The vehicle flipped multiple times. The patient was ejected and died on scene. I guess I had not spent much time in cow pastures before this call, but I vividly remember the bugs. And the bugs, like the flies and the ants, kept finding their way to the patient, and it was really bothering me. Like, the wreck had just happened. It wasn't like the patient was out there for an extended period of time or anything like that, but it just caught me off guard how the bugs would gravitate towards the patient. And so I spent the whole time that I was there trying to keep the bugs off of the patient. It was a losing battle, but my brain could not, I don't know, my brain just couldn't, my brain was not okay with watching these bugs crawl on my patient. And the bugs weren't coming on me, they weren't bothering anybody else, but they somehow knew that person was deceased and they were just gravitating towards the patient, and it drove me crazy. And so I spent the whole time trying to keep bugs off the patient. And again, that was something that I guess I thought that I could control. I think now that I'm sitting here talking about it and thinking about these things, it seems like some of these weird things that we might do, we're doing in an effort to control something because there was nothing else that I could do for that patient or the family. And I guess my brain just feels better trying to do something productive. And that day I was fixated on keeping the bugs off of the patient. So that's what I did. This was not even a call that I ran. This was a call that a coworker ran. And I'm including it in this because even though I was not on that call, just hearing about it had a lasting impact on me. I believe that my coworker was struggling, which is why he confided in me. He just needed, I think, to tell somebody. But there was a new mother that was killed. Again, I can't and won't go into specifics of how she was killed. But for whatever reason, my coworker, I don't know if there was a cardiac rhythm. I don't know the circumstances. But they did work it, which means they did CPR and all of those things. I don't even know if they took her to the hospital or worked it on scene and then pronounced her on scene. I have no idea. All I know is what he told me. And this new mother was lactating, like all new mothers do. And every time they would do chest compressions, with each compression, she would lactate more. And I think it bothered him seeing that, and so he confided in me, and I just could not rationalize that. It's something I've never seen before on a call. Made me very glad I was not on that call. Just incredibly sad to have that image in your head. Whew. Okay, that's enough of that. I gotta go turn on some happy music or something after this, but all of these calls took place over many years and different states. But again, they're not unusual calls. What was unusual about them was my reaction to some of the things that maybe I couldn't control, or I don't know, just inanimate objects having some kind of impact on you for whatever reason. And that's something I wanted to just talk about. I've not really heard anybody talk about these things before. They tell stories and all of that, but I've not really heard of people fixating on like an inanimate object or just something that's out of place, or just kind of fixated on something you wouldn't normally fixate on. And I found myself fixated on different things with these calls, and that's what I decided to tell you about today. Don't worry guys, not all of these videos are going to be this sad. I probably shouldn't have started off with such a somber mood, but when I was thinking about 411 on 911, for whatever reason, these came to my mind and I jotted them down real quick and decided to talk about these inanimate objects and things being out of place that impacted me. Maybe just me, I don't know. Maybe other first responders out there too, but I could be crazy. I have no idea. Well, we know I'm crazy. You know what I'm saying, don't you? If you're a first responder and you have a story that you want told, something funny, something scary, something crazy or unusual, or something that you want to talk about, feel free to send me an email at littletraumamama@gmail.com. Or if you would like to submit an anonymous story, you can go to my website, LittleTraumaMama.com, go to the contact page, put in a fake email, and send me your story. But just be as grammatically accurate as possible so that I can show your story. Future Christy here to tell you that the reason I'm looking off to the side is because when I filmed this, I had another camera set up so I could have two angles, and then I ended up not being able to use any of the footage, so that's why I'm looking away, and this is weird. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoy this video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and come hang out with me again soon.